There are a lot of ghost stories in American mythology. Hauntings, strange lights, restless spirits. That's partly because there were so many unexplained occurrences in the early colonial days. New illnesses, harsh climates, mysterious disappearances, all of these things could take on an eerie edge in the minds of the settlers. But here's the question for this mini preseason episode. Did any of those tales have a basis in history? And if so, which one was the very first ghost story to be recorded on American soil? Some might point to Washington Irving's Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Others will say it's older, maybe from the English settlements or borrowed from Native American legend. But there's one strange account from Boston in 1688 that has a strong claim to being the first. It's called the Goodwin Possessions. It's not quite the kind of ghost story we tell around the campfire now. No rattling chains or transparent figures, but it is full of uncanny afflictions and that unsettling mix of faith and fear that shaped so much of America's earliest supernatural folklore. And at the center of it all was a man who would cast a long shadow over New England's haunted imagination, Cotton Mather. Before we step into Cotton Mather's account of the Goodwin household, it's worth knowing the world they lived in. Boston in the late 1680s was still a Puritan stronghold, a small but growing colonial city where religion was the organizing principle of daily life. And Cotton Mather, son of the influential minister Increase Mather, was one of the most learned and devout men in the colonies. He would later play a role, a controversial one, in the Salem witch trials. But a few years before that, he found himself face to face with a case that seemed to blur the line between medical mystery and supernatural attack. In his 1689 book titled Memorable Providences Relating to Witchcrafts and Possessions, Mather described the afflicted family in careful and often chilling detail. It began with Martha Goodwin, the daughter of a local mason. She quarreled with her neighbor, who Cotton Mather described as, quote, an ignorant and scandalous old woman whose miserable husband, before he died, had sometimes complained of her that she was undoubtedly a witch, end quote. The Goodwins had 6 children, but this story is about 4 of them in particular, not the oldest, who was already out working, nor the youngest, who was still a baby. Rather, this one is about Martha and her siblings, 4 children in all. As the story goes, they begin to experience strange fits. Mather wrote that they were, quote, tortured everywhere in a manner very grievous, beyond those that attend an epilepsy or a catalepsy, or those that they call diseases of astonishment, end quote. At first, physicians tried to treat the children. Mather consulted his friend, Dr. Thomas Oakes, who examined them and concluded that, quote, nothing but an hellish witchcraft could be the original of these maladies, end quote. The symptoms came and went, but when they struck, they were terrible to see. The children cried out, convulsed, and claimed to see specters in the room. Their afflictions defied ordinary explanation, and in the Puritan mind, the cause seemed clear. This was the work of the devil, carried out through human hands. The neighbor lady who had quarreled with Mrs. Goodwin was an old woman named Anne Goody Glover. By the way, Goody is short for goodwife. She was arrested and tried for witchcraft. Mather records that she stubbornly maintained that others, quote, had a hand in it as well as she, end quote, but she never named names. She was convicted and soon after executed, the last person to be hanged for witchcraft in Boston. But here's where the story grows stranger. Goody Glover's death didn't end the children's sufferings. The fits, the visions, the torments, they continued. If anything, they actually deepened. Mather, who often visited the Goodwin home, became convinced that Boston was under direct assault from the powers of darkness. Mather wrote the story of the Goodwins as the first of his tales of strange and supernatural events. It planted deep seeds in the colonial imagination and reinforced the idea that the devil could work through neighbors and that signs of possession or affliction might demand not just prayer, but legal action as well. Only a few years later, when a group of girls in Salem began to show similar symptoms, the community and some of its leaders, including Mather himself, already had a framework for what they believed was happening. Of course, the Goodwin possessions is not the only contender for America's first haunting. There are earlier accounts of strange happenings, ghost stories whispered in Jamestown, reports of spectral battles on the frontier, and Native American legends that colonial writers adapted into their own tales. But the Goodwin case stands out for one reason. It's the first such story to be written down in detail, printed, and read on both sides of the Atlantic. In other words, it's one of the first supernatural accounts from the colonies to enter the public record and shape the way Americans told ghost stories. As you'll see later on in Season 1, several of the early American writers reference Cotton Mather in his writings. Of course, the question is, was it really witchcraft? Was it illness or misunderstanding? Or was it something else entirely? Whatever you believe, the Goodwin case is a reminder that America's haunted imagination is as old as the colonies themselves, and that our myths of the supernatural have always been entangled with our fears about the community, the neighbor, and the unseen. If you want to read Cotton Mather's own account for yourself, you can find it in Memorable Providences Relating to Witchcrafts and Possessions, which is available online in a lot of places. I also found the Retrospect Journal's article Precursors to Salem, Part 2, The Goodwin Possession, to be a fascinating modern summary. The themes in the Goodwin's story echoes throughout the rest of early American mythology and legend, and the ideas of a troubled conscience and supernatural enemies come to form the bedrock of American story and legend. This is what we will explore in Season 1, launching September 17th. We hope you'll join us for it.